Should you avoid drafting running backs early in your startup dynasty drafts? All that and more in this episode of Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. We've also got a special guest for you guys. It's Michelle Madjuk, who you can follow on Twitter. Yeah, we've heard of her before. Follow her on Twitter at Paul Blastum. We're going to be doing some dynasty strategy today, talking about your startup leagues, 1QB leagues, and let's just get right into it. Michelle, we'll start with you. What's just your general overall philosophy kind of going into your startup drafts and dynasty leagues?
So I like to go in without too much of a plan because I don't want to have like a strict strategy. Like I need to take a wide receiver in the first and second round, or I need to at least have one running back in the first 3 rounds. It depends on where the board lands. And I don't want to be too strict about which position I feel like I need. It's dynasty. Like you're going to be building this team for a long time. You're going to be making moves. You're going to be making trades, and you should be taking the best player available that also will hold really good trade value as well. So there's certain players like a Derrick Henry that for whatever reason over the last 3 years, he just doesn't hold, like there's no trade value with him because everyone every year is worried he's too old, right? And he's fallen off and he's not going to be worth anything. So there are certain players like that aren't really worth having on my roster because I know there's no trade value. They might help me win some games, but I also just need that important aspect as well. But it all just depends. So if I'm in the first round, I would rather take a wide receiver like an AJ Brown instead of an Austin Eckler because I do prefer wide receivers in Dynasty over running backs, but there does come a point at the same time where a running back might be more useful. Like when you get to the stage of the Jonathan Taylor or the T. Higgins, I think finding a T. Higgins type of wide receiver is a lot easier than finding a Jonathan Taylor type running back. So it's just comparing those positional values at whatever point you are at the draft.
Kate?
Yeah, I tend to share a similar philosophy. I feel like you shouldn't ever be too rigid. And this goes for like dynasty startup drafts. This goes for even your redraft leagues. I do think that going in with a narrow mindset of I need to accomplish, check box, check box, check box. I do think that can sometimes hinder your ability to actually build out a contending roster and build out a balanced roster. Michelle, I think you mentioned like briefly best player available, like because of that trade value, taking the best player available, even if you are maybe leaning a little wide receiver heavy in the first few rounds, like these assets, I think, tend to balance themselves out as the draft goes on. Like, let's not forget, dynasty drafts are very deep. There are a lot of opportunities to create balance throughout the draft. But I think if you're going in with the mindset of best player available and especially using a tier-based system, that helps create longevity. But also, like, if there's a player on the board that you have right in the middle of your lap that maybe you're not particularly high on, but training camp's just around the corner, like a Jahmyr Gibbs. If you're not overly high on a Jahmyr Gibbs, but he's falling in your lap and the hype train is about to be through the roof, it might behoove you to take that player, even if you're not necessarily high on them, if the hype is about to sway one way or the other.
See, this is fascinating because we're going to get some different strategies and ideas here. Because for me, and I've done a bunch of startup drafts over the summer so far, I'm just not a slave to the ADP in the value at all. What I want are guys that I want to root for, right? And I'm going to churn my roster so much anyway. So I want to draft with my first 2 or 3 picks, guys that I know are going to be anchors on my team. I'll give you an example. I was in a startup draft a couple weeks ago, and I think I had the 7th or 8th pick. I wanted CeeDee Lamb. I know that he's going to be available a little bit later. I know his trade value isn't quite as valuable as some of the other guys that were available, but I don't want to have to mess around trying to trade for him and maybe having to overpay. I'm just going to draft him and then we'll move on and figure out the rest later. I just want to get at the very start of the draft a couple guys that I know, okay, I'm building around these guys. I'm not trading them regardless. Let's do that and then we'll move on. Michelle, what are your thoughts on that?
What Marcus is saying is that he's a homer and he likes to pick
Only
Cowboys players.
Yes, well, hold on.
That's what I heard.
I am a homer for the guys that I like and the guys that I want. We talk about this all the time. There's a couple of players that I really, really value, and I don't care where the ADP is at. I just want them on my team because football's supposed to be fun, right? Get the guys you want to root for.
Are those players CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, Dak Prescott,
No.
Tony Pollard?
No, absolutely not. There's a couple receivers, CeeDee Lamb and Chris Olave are the guys that I just really want on all my dynasty teams. And I just don't want to have to mess around. Okay, maybe I'll take Tyreek Hill and try to flip him for Chris Olave and something else later. I just don't want to deal with all that. I'm just going to take the guys that I want.
I mean, I think that's like that's definitely a fair point to make, right? Like ADP, it's I think a very useful tool. There was just a conversation on Twitter back a few weeks ago discussing how highly you should value ADP, and it's a tool. Like that's what ADP is. Like we refer to, Dynasty Startup ADP on Dynasty League Football all the time. It's a tool, and that tool can help you gauge, the trade market can help you gauge how highly or how long you can wait for a player or how highly you need to draft them. But it's one tool, and ADP, you can look at ADP and that might not actually reflect what's going to happen in your dynasty startup drafts because everything's different.
Michelle, I've got a question for you. When you're doing these drafts, how much do you care about like roster limits and how many receivers you can start? If you're in a league where you can only start 3 receivers, are you still going to draft like 5 or 6 receivers early just because they hold their value longer? Or what's your general thoughts there?
Well, I think it's important to look at the lineup strategies there with the settings in your league, because some leagues will have you have to start 3 wide receivers, and then that's not even including the flexes where you can actually play them. I think in those situations, you really need to make sure you're getting a couple really reliable young studs that can really just be the anchor of your team there for the next 5 years or 5+ years. Yeah. But like you said, if you can only start 3 in any given week and you can't, you can't put them in your flex or whatever, then yeah, you kind of want to change your mindset there. Maybe go a little bit heavier in the running back position if you need to start more of them. If it's a 2 quarterback league, like you always need to look at the settings in your league to kind of figure out what positions are most important. I did want to clarify something. When I said best player available, I didn't mean like the top guy in the ADP that's sitting there for you. Yep. I meant who do you believe is the best player available left? And that's going to change for every single person. And it's most likely not going to be the top guy in the ADP on the app at that time. I just like, who do you believe is the best player? And that's kind of how I go about it.
Let's talk about the positions that you should target and you shouldn't target early in your startup drafts next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's so easy to create a job post right now. All you do is add your job and then the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, we are back here talking about some dynasty startup strategy. Michelle, I want to talk about the positions that you need to avoid in the early rounds of your draft. What are you not looking to draft here? Is it running backs? Is it quarterbacks? What are your thoughts?
I really don't have a position I'm trying to avoid. As I said, like I just want to build the best team possible. So if Mark Andrews is sitting there, in the third round, I'm not going to be like, oh, I don't want a tight end right now. Like I would like to kind of punt the tight end position. I do think it's very important to get a very good tight end because those are like the hardest to get in Dynasty. If you don't draft a good tight end or land a good tight end in one of your rookie drafts, trading for one of them, you have to pay so much because it's Travis Kelce and really the rest of the field. So maybe if you think Mark Andrews is going to be reliable moving forward, or TJ Hawkinson with his new team, I am okay going for those guys. Obviously, running backs and wide receivers are a position I'm looking for. And quarterback, if it's a one quarterback league, then yes, of course, you kind of wait on that position a little bit more. I don't want to take a guy in the first 3 rounds, but also it's never a bad thing to have a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts on your team. I play in some one quarterback dynasty leagues, and guess what? The teams I have those guys in, I am pretty good because having a quarterback who scores a ton of points every week is very helpful for you. I will say I got the Josh Allens and the Jalen Hurts when they were cheaper. I wasn't paying a top 3 pick in a dynasty startup, but it's still like I still want to get a quarterback that I'm not like, I don't want a Kirk Cousins starting every week for me. So I'm not going that low, but yeah, I don't want to take a quarterback in the first 3 rounds if I'm doing a one quarterback startup.
Okay.
Yeah, there's definitely, I always feel like I talk about team construction and roster construction, and how you approach your teams is very much dependent on how you start out the drafts, etc. But for me, addressing some of these positions like tight end, where it's like Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, a couple of elites, then everybody else, and then the quarterback position, where obviously you have such high upside players, and then there's a big tier break between Josh Allen, like in those situations where there are clear tier breaks, I like to start out my rosters with some wide receivers for longevity. But once that elite tier of wide receivers has passed, and I'm at spots where I don't necessarily see a ton of value either at the running back position or the wide receiver position, that's when I start to look, is there an elite tight end on the board that is going to give me a significant edge? Is there an elite quarterback on the board that is going to give me a significant edge? And sometimes that comes earlier than I like. Sometimes that comes a little bit later, and you feel more comfortable about that. But for me, it's all about looking at what else is available on the board and how I feel about those assets. And then once I'm getting lukewarm, that's when I feel like, all right, let's invest in this top tier quarterback. I mean, Marcus, you and I specifically have said over and over again, like there's even a case that you could make that Patrick Mahomes is undervalued in dynasty startups, and he's drafted on average as the quarterback 1. And the reason he can be undervalued is because he is so freaking stable and provides you a literal cornerstone to your roster. There's not a single moment where you are going to have to wonder, start or sit Patrick Mahomes ever.
Yeah.
And same with Josh Allen, same with Jalen Hurts. The answer is always yes. Whereas, Michelle, you liken to a Kirk Cousins, where, yeah, you're going to have some weeks where you're not necessarily so sure that that's going to be your option. And it doesn't always feel great investing in those positions necessarily early, but that stability and removing that aspect of decision making from your lineup can kind of be invaluable if the draft falls to you that way.
Michelle, I want to talk to you about the running back position, because Kate and I have made this the summer of every running back is a sell. Like every single running back has lost value this offseason. I mean, I pick your running back, and it seems like they've all gotten worse. How do you handle that in startup drafts? Do you just ignore the running back position early? Do you try to get like an anchor running back and then just throw numbers at the position? What are your thoughts?
Exactly that. I like, if I'm going to take a running back early, it's just one, and then I'm going to try to just draft a bunch later on to just try to fill that RB2 position and try to figure it out and piece it up that way. Because like for whatever reason, well, there are reasons, because running backs fall off quickly, but A running back loses their value so quickly, even if they have high draft capital. Like if they're not shiny, if they're not impressive, like think of a Najee Harris. He's been fine. Like he's been putting up okay fantasy numbers, nothing super exciting, but now nobody really cares for him in Dynasty. Like you're not going to get a lot of trade value. But a guy like Jerry Jeudy, who is a first round wide receiver, he has done nothing in his career, far less than Najee Harris has ever done. Yet his value is still like, ooh, like this is the thing with wide receivers. It's like, ooh, they have a new coach. Ooh, they have a new offense coordinator. Ooh, they have a new quarterback. It doesn't matter they were bad. They were a first round wide receiver. They're going to be good at some time. They hold their value for so long. So even if you miss on the wide receiver you take, that you like, you want to like this player and you want to believe in them. But if they have early draft capital, they have high excitement, their trade value is going to hold for a long time because there's always an excuse for those wide receivers, which people don't really have those excuses for running backs. Like if you're just not good, people just say you're not good and they don't even really care if it's due to the offensive line. They're just like, no, you stink.
And even if you are good, like your value still decreases, right? Like I look at somebody like Tony Pollard, who anytime he's gotten opportunities, he does well. But because he's coming off an injury, because he's in the final year of his deal, because of the franchise tag, we've seen his value drop this offseason. And that's with him being a standalone, he's going to be the bell cow for the Cowboys this year. So I agree. I running back is the one position, man. I have to feel like I'm getting such a value in the early parts of the draft for me to select you.
Think about Javonte Williams last year. He was a top 5, basically running back in Dynasty. Everyone wanted him. He was the new shiny object that was going to get the full-time role in Denver and just be the next monster in fantasy. And I know he got injured, but even prior to the injury, he wasn't doing much of anything. And now his value in Dynasty has been shot. It's so much lower than it was last year.
Kate, I got a question about the running backs for you. So let's say you are, taking on the strategy. If you're just going to take one early, or maybe you're just going to avoid the position at all in the first 4 or 5 rounds, is there a certain type of running back in the mid rounds, the late rounds that you're going after?
Definitely depends on, sort of your league scoring format. Obviously, if you're in a PPR league, going to look for some of those value opportunities that you might get from running backs that actually get targeted, right? Like it should be no secret that you want running backs who are at least getting those opportunities, because not all running backs do. The Buffalo Bills, for instance, the Baltimore Ravens, for instance, a lot of these offenses with rushing quarterbacks, we've seen kind of a dip in that production on the receiving end from the running back position. So that's kind of my step one in trying to find some of these values. But also, I think targeting some of these backfields where there are question marks. For example, the New Orleans Saints right now. Obviously, plenty of legal questions surrounding running back Alvin Kamara, but like Kendre Miller, the running back that obviously there's plenty of questions about him as a rookie, but I was fairly high on him as a prospect. I think this is a great landing spot. Obviously, Jamal Williams is there, but this is a situation where I can reasonably see Kendre Miller becoming the leading rusher for this team, and I can get him at a value of like RB33. For example, AJ Dillon, who, we've seen him kind of split this backfield back and forth with Aaron Jones, but right now, AJ Dillon's fallen to RB35 in Dynasty.
AJ Dillon's a waste of a draft pick. That's why. It's throwing your draft pick into the garbage.
No, but looking at these running backs that might have the opportunity to take over a backfield, Khalil Herbert, RB30, RB39. Like
also,
all of these running backs have opportunity.
Who's being severely disrespected is Alexander Mattison, who has a true possibility. Like I honestly would not be shocked if he was RB5 or higher this upcoming season in fantasy points, and he's like his value didn't rise nearly as much as it should. So when you get to that point, it's like, well, I can get a guy that should be absolutely fantastic, whose value can rise, because it's not just if he's great this year, it's not going to just be like, okay, well, the Vikings are done with him. Like he'll still have that opportunity there moving forward. And I see no reason why he's not going to be great with a full-time role, at least great in fantasy, maybe not like the best running back in the league, but great for fantasy, kind of like a James Conner. And whenever James Conner is healthy, he's really good for fantasy. So like those are the type of players I'm eyeing. A couple years ago, I won a dynasty league with Rashad Penny and Darrell Williams starting in my finals. And they were great in the fight. Like you can find these running backs to kind of fill those holes throughout the season. And also you can trade for them very cheap throughout the season because people are willing to give them away for a rookie 3rd round pick or, a cheap wide receiver or something like that. You can fill these spots in the running back position throughout the year pretty easily.
Lots of dynasty leagues are won with guys like Darrell Williams, right, for the Chiefs a couple of years ago, or a Khalil Herbert. Was it 2 years ago? Khalil Herbert at the end of the year was absolutely fantastic as a day 3 pick. So 100% agree. I want to dive more into the quarterback discussion because I think we're all in agreement. If you draft Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, you set them and you forget it. That part's really easy. But what if you don't get Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes or Justin Fields or Jalen Hurts? What do you do next? We'll get into that in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs make you look good. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and the leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they just fit way better. They fit better than regular shorts that are made of that stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like a khaki shorts, but they stretch, so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Bird Dog uses anti-stink, sweat-wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. I absolutely love my Bird Dog shorts. I wear them to the golf course. I wear them around the house. They're just the absolute best fitting shorts I've ever worn. Now you can own a pair by just going to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or enter promo code LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That is birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or use the promo code LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. All right, we want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Everydayers, Matt and Ryan will be back on Tuesday and Wednesday to continue some of this off-season strategy. We're going to be going through some Dynasty 101 talk over the next couple of weeks, so make sure you tune in for that. But we are wrapping up here talking about the quarterback position. Obviously, if you get a Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, you are set. But what if you don't get one of those quarterbacks? Michelle, what type of quarterback are you looking to grab after them?
I'm looking for someone that has potential to break out and someone that has a very high floor with their rushing ability, like an Anthony Richardson. This is how I got the Josh Allens and the Jalen Hurts for cheap back in the day because I was willing to bet that they would fix their throwing issues, their accuracy issues, because they're going to have time in the league to do that as they're winning games with their legs, as they're getting it done on the ground and helping their team still not be miserable, right? Like the Eagles and the Bills still found a way to get some wins because of their quarterback was able to still move the ball on the ground and get it done enough through the air. I think a guy like Anthony Richardson can do that. So those are the type of quarterbacks I'm looking at to be on my team. Obviously, I would prefer he's not my quarterback 1 right off the bat. Like I don't really want to have to start him in week 1 and hope for the best, but I love having those guys be my backup quarterback, the ability to really grow into one of these top 5 quarterbacks you want, and you got him for cheap. Now, I don't know how cheap as Anthony Richardson is going, but he has to be much cheaper than Allen, Hurts, and Mahomes.
Yes.
Yeah. QB9 right now in Dynasty startups.
Which is fine. It's fine, right? Like I would much rather do that than take somebody like Kirk Cousins. Obviously, the age factor in this, but you can find solid quarterback production in free agency in your QB1 leagues. Like getting the Kirk Cousins, the Aaron Rodgers, the Jared Goff type of production isn't hard to find, but getting the guys that can get you 4,000 passing yards and 1,000 rushing yards, those are the guys that hold value.
100%.
Absolutely agree there.
Okay, what other quarterbacks are you looking to target? Obviously, we know rushing upside, but how do you handle guys like Bryce Young, who number 1 overall pick, CJ Stroud, number 2 overall pick, quarterbacks that have this really insane draft capital, but maybe aren't prolific runners?
My general approach, and like I know we talk about this all the time, the Konami cheat code and all that good stuff. We know that rushing production is very good for the quarterback position. I tend to look at some of these unknown players by evaluating if everything goes perfectly right. If everything goes exactly as I could plan them based on their draft profile, based on what we know they do well, based on what we know they don't do well, based on the tendencies we've seen them to have in college, how does that project to the NFL and what does that ceiling look like for fantasy football? In the case of Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, despite the high draft capital, I think generally speaking, if you project everything to go right for Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, what you're looking at is, the pocket passing presence. Generally, not necessarily conducive to some of that high end production for fantasy football. So I tend to avoid, especially in single QB leagues, some of these guys that do come out with as unproven assets because they haven't taken a snap yet. But B, even if they were proven, like, we look at, guys like Kirk Cousins, like these are guys that because of their profile as pocket passers, their ceiling is just slightly lower. And especially for some of these unknowns, we don't know how low that floor is, and it could be pretty low. So generally, they're off my board, and I
We
hate
have
to
been
say
so
that.
mean to Kirk Cousins this episode.
No,
He's an okay. He's
he's
an
fine.
okay
He's
fantasy. Yeah,
he's a
yeah.
great fantasy. He's a great fantasy quarterback, and he's one of these guys that
He's
has been
awesome for
incredibly
Superflex
stable.
leagues.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, and the thing with Kirk Cousins is you're seeing somebody who's putting up almost 5,000 passing yards a season and 30 passing touchdowns every year. That's fantastic numbers. But you look at where he finishes every year in the quarterback rankings, and it's never anywhere close to the top 5. That just goes to show you the value of rushing, right? Is you really got to find those quarterbacks that have the rushing upside to really have a difference maker. So, Michelle, any final thoughts on how you handle the quarterback position before we head out?
I think it's all about trading for guys that you believe in that maybe are lower value. I think that's the cheapest way to get them. So obviously at this point, Justin Fields' value is a lot higher than what it was last offseason, but that would have been a great time to trade for him last offseason. So when you believe in these guys, let's say Anthony Richardson has a rough first year. That's when you trade for him after that season because he still does have that rushing floor. He can get better as a passer, but that's what I'm kind of looking for there is trading for a guy that has a high ceiling, but getting him at low value because that is the cheat code. I think a lot of times in one quarterback leagues, even people are like, oh, quarterbacks don't matter. No, they do matter. Having a great quarterback still is great and a huge advantage. It's just about getting them cheaper than using a top 3 pick on them. If you have to use a top 3 pick, then you're not getting that cheat code, right? You're not getting the advantage. But if you're able to find one of these guys cheaper a year or two before their breakout, that's when you really have that advantage in fantasy.
That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Again, Matt and Ryan will be back on Tuesday and Wednesday to continue talking about some Dynasty strategies. So tune in for that. Follow our fantastic guest, Michelle Magdziuk, on Twitter at BallBlast'em. You can follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. The Locked On Dynasty podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Check out our show on YouTube, and we will see you guys right back here tomorrow.